you're assuming that that's the reason that the ground was chosen. You're assuming that there's a toxic leak. You're assuming all of these terrible things that get attributed to it that may not have been a factor at all. And often the people that are making those decisions are the people who have been elected in those neighborhoods and those cities to make those calls. Now,
all right, welcome back, everyone. This is I Didn't Read Your Book. I am your host, Lutch, and today we are not doing a podcast, but in fact, we are doing another edition of IDRYB Live.
What I have been seeing personally, when you say there's systemic racism, that elicits you are essentially labeling everyone who's white as racist. And when you do that, that causes a real problem with people who don't see themselves as racist. And I know the arguments, well, just because you don't see yourself as racist doesn't mean that you're not racist. I'm sorry, I just don't subscribe to that. You're essentially, and I cringed when you said whitewash. But when to me, when you go through and say, well, racism is this huge, massive problem, I don't disagree, but I also don't agree that it's a problem that solely exists in the white community. And I feel like that's where that's being pushed a lot.
I would
I'm not saying you did, but I'm saying
I would say that in the United States, it'd probably be easy to say, like, of different populations, affluent white people would probably be the least racist population. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that in terms of racial prejudice, certain ethnic groups and minority groups have more racial prejudice against each other. But that ultimately is not like, there are two types of racism. That's like the racism that we see as like an individual, like a person's racist to me, they called me a slur. That's something that we deal with socially. We shame people who are racist. That's not necessarily the issue when we're talking about systemic racism. Systemic racism is the issue of systems of power, or the way that we've organized our society, that create those blind spots for people who have different races. And that's not something we can address. So, for example, one of the major issues that we have is that our crumbling infrastructure is concentrated in poor areas, and those infrastructure had historical issues because, unfortunately, segregated and redlined areas did not receive infrastructure funding. So, which is why we have a concentration of all of our lead pipes and cracking infrastructure in areas that are majority minority. And so, because we know that, say, something like lead is responsible for developmental disorders in children, making it difficult for them to learn. It's an endocrine disruptor, harming their development. It causes them to become more violent and aggressive. Those would just contribute to the negative impacts that a person feels. And that has nothing to do with you or me being personally racist, but has to do with mistakes that our ancestors, mistakes that our predecessors made when crafting legislation that we ultimately have to pay the price for.
To me, it's always, and I'm not saying you're wrong by any stretch. Having lived in Detroit and I live outside Washington, D.C., and I've been into some neighborhoods that, are quite run down and are project filled. And I've seen what has happened to Detroit overall. But I would label a lot of that more economic than racially based, given that when you look at the preponderance of legislatures in the state of Michigan, they tend to be more liberal. And in the last 20 years, they also tend to be more people of color. So the concept that somehow this isn't happening because it's race, it's like, well, wait, a lot of these cities have been run by minorities for many, many years. And you're going, well, they need more money. Okay, I get that, but that's their role, is to secure that money. And you're making the argument that they're not getting it because of race. And that's where I'm struggling a little bit. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's where I have a visceral reaction to it, and
Would it,
that's where
So
because I don't know if that's the case or
would
not.
enough
real
would
real quick, Anirudh, Blaine, would it be accurate to say that you see this, you see Anirudh's point as an oversimplification? Is that accurate or no?
I don't know if it's that or if we're quibbling over what a definition is, and that's what I always kind of worry about when we start talking about words like systemic, because we can
right.
go down that
And if that's
we've
the case,
gone
then
down that rabbit hole a couple times tonight.
right, and I think if that's the case, then let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's have that conversation so that we can have a definitive understanding of what it is that we're talking about. But I was just trying to characterize, Anirudh. What were you going to say?
Yeah, so I think that I don't want to play too much into this like left right dynamic, but unfortunately, the problem with systemic racism is that even Democrats with their own systems are also contributing to this racism. It's not like the Republicans are the only people who ever do bad, or conservatives are the only people who ever do bad, or white people are the only people who ever do bad. No, it's an issue that unfortunately a lot of people, even people who are victims of racism, are contributing to. So it's not like a
I would agree with
simplification.
that.
So I'll give you a great example. I think that if I Blaine, if I could give you like enough examples of these types of implicit biases, or not even implicit, just implicit biases, but like just issues, decisions that we made as a society that make it very difficult to repair this. Do you think I could convince you this? Like, for example, in similar areas, tenants or homeowners who are black have shown shown systemic under evaluation of their property. I think there was one study that showed that black tenants on average had their homes evaluated, accounting for other factors like location, geography, square footage. They found that black residents had, I believe, a 28% lower evaluation of their homes. Let me find the exact study. But there are examples where, or like, there's another example where.
But okay, real quick before you move on from that, though, that scene, and I don't even disagree that that is an example of what I would be comfortable calling systemic racism. However, when you look at the context of that, it is, if that were the whole story, then there would be a whole industry of white people who go to pretend that they live in homes to get them appraised and so on and so forth. This is a story that I heard about somebody, which I think you're referring to. If not, I'm sure it's happened many times. But a black family had an appraisal on their house, and then they thought it was rather low, and they got a white family to come in and do exactly what I just said. And the white people's appraisal was in fact higher. So obviously that's anecdotal, and that's one one example of a direct comparison, even though it was different appraisers, so it wasn't exactly 1-to-1, but it was, I think it was big enough. I don't remember the numbers. It was a big enough difference where it shouldn't be that big. However, the on a larger scale, because of the redlining and these issues that you're talking about that did certainly exist. If you take the aggregate appraisal of square footage and all that stuff, it falls, it's much more on the neighborhood and the area than it is on the individual.
Right. So home prices are multivariate. So there are multiple factors that go into it. So whenever we run some sort of multivariate regression, we're going to account for that. So we're going to do ceteris paribus. We're going to hold square footage equal. We're going to do it within the same neighborhood. And the only factor that we're going to look at in differences is the racial breakdown of the family. And if we're only looking at the racial breakdown of the family, here are the numbers. I linked the Brookings study into the
I'll take
chat.
a look at that. I'm not going to do it live online.
Yeah, it's a long read. It's a very, very, very long read.
Okay. Well, if there's,
But the math checks out. It's a very, very thorough analysis.
Okay, but they're citing this, and you're saying that makes it systemic.
So this is just an example of systemic, but this is like the broader systemic racism is the geospatial segregation.
So again, why don't you define what you mean by
I'm kind of curious where you're coming from with that, just so that I
of course
frame of reference.
So this is a tendency of people. They often live in communities where they're right next to each other. So I'm in an area of North Texas where there are a lot of Asians, specifically South Asians, Indians in our area, and they tend to like live together. They have those same types of communications. That's just a tendency of people. So geospatial segregation is that oft is when groups of individuals end up inculcating into like I guess their own like seclusion zones or little boroughs, ethnic neighborhoods. Those is necessarily a consequence of individuals behaving that way. If it's we get worried when there are certain privileges that come to certain areas because of which groups live there, and the inability for those groups to move around or to essentially move to different neighborhoods. So the movement across neighborhoods is also something that we worry about. If there's a barrier that inhibits the free movement of people within cities to better neighborhoods, and there are factors that preference the rights of some neighborhoods over others, we're going to be worried about that, and we're going to call that like a systemic, and if it's based on race, systemic racism. It's geospatial. Like, I'll give you a great example. If there needs to be like a dump built somewhere in a city, um, if there's a preponderance where one ethnic group's neighborhood is valued less because that's who they are, it's more likely for a city who's, if they want to use eminent domain to buy that land off, they're going to move to the poorer neighborhood, and that's where the dump is there. So if there are toxic chemicals leaking from that dump, it's going to hit the people who already are probably the poorest and least well off and least able to advocate for their rights. So just like us like engaging in a rational economic transaction, we're going to recreate those harms.
Well, I understand now where you're coming from, and I would say that there's a few flaws with even that scenario that you throw out because there's a lot of hypotheticals tied to that. You there. I will tell you, there was a time in our country, my hometown, where I was raised in Battle Creek, Michigan, when they rerouted the Kalamazoo River and concreted it. They deliberately ran it through a poor black neighborhood, but that was 1952. Now, if somebody were to try something like that, the media would be all over it. Everyone would be up in arms. And there would be support across the board going, okay, that's just wrong.
So we saw this issue with Flint, Michigan, where the pipes eroded, and when the river was rerouted, that ended up causing lead leakage into the water. It was a big media story. President Obama talked about it. To
Yep.
this day, Flint, Michigan doesn't have clean water. We talked about it. We never fixed it. So I think the outrage is one thing, but outrage is not necessarily sufficient to fix a problem.
Well,
So
I think if you check, Michigan allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to actually replace those pipes. It is an infrastructure issue. I completely am aware of it, and I'm familiar with Flint as well. And I can tell you, it's not a quick fix because it's
it's
not
not.
just the lead running from the main lines to the houses. It's lead in some of those older houses having to
Mhm.
be replaced. And we're talking, they've allocated. I don't know the amount. I'm sure you can find it online. They've allocated a lot of money to that. The fact that it's not an instantaneous change, I think that's, you got to understand infrastructure isn't. We've seen this across the board with, you try to replace a bridge, it takes forever. I think most of Michigan's roads are under construction right now, it feels like. And that's part of it. But to label it as a race issue, I think is not fair when
So sorry to interrupt your podcast experience. I just want to remind you, if you're enjoying what you're watching, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. And if you really love it, there's some support links in the description. I would love if you can help out the channel. And back to the show.
you look at the representation of who's running the Flint government. I just feel like how could you sit there and say it was some other person that inflicted this? There were decisions that were made at the state level, and I know that's been litigated heavily, and there were bad decisions made. But to say that it was done because of race, I just don't subscribe to that.
So could you believe that we can have actions that have racist consequences without ever having to intend those racist consequences?
Absolutely. There's
So
always unintended for everything that the government ever does, there's unintended consequences.
And
Of
to
course.
I've been waiting for when we were first talking about this, and even the CRT stuff. One of the first things you said was, about racial disparity in general, and I think I'm not exactly sure how to say this, but it seems like there is, and I'm not specifically talking about you. I'm not even specifically talking about a political party, but just in general, in the general zeitgeist, or however you want to put it. There seems to be an axiomatic acceptance that racial disparity is a good metric of, is the country doing good or bad? Full stop. Do we have if black people are 16% of the population, do we have 16% of black people who make over this much? And if so, then we're good, and if not, then America's terrible. That's
Oh,
that's kind of
that's not an axiomatic belief. There are actually some important reasons for why we would use that as a metric. So, are you familiar with ANOVA regression?
no.
All right. So, if we want to say there are two populations
Well,
of people,
real quick, I want to make sure you understand. I'm saying that this is. I'm not saying it's a non-factor. I'm saying I think there is a tendency to overemphasize the degree to which racial disparity is a factor in any given issue.
all right. So, I'll explain like a little bit of the mathematics. So, generally speaking, like large populations, if if there's something different about them, like for example, the average male in the Netherlands is taller than the average male in Indonesia, right? They're the same population of males, but in two different countries, they're two different heights. Now, what are the reasons for those differences in those populations? It's going to be nutrition, it's going to be genetics, there's going to be multiple different reasons for that. So when we say like if we lived in a truly race blind society, the median household income of African Americans would be no different than no statistically different than the median income of like white Americans. Now, because there's a disparity, we now have to ask the question: is what are the factors that are causing it? Is there some other factor that's tied to race? Is it like somehow like their melanin count affects how productive you are? Is there some alternative explanatory for why these populations are different? And we see consistently accounting for different variables like class, income, geography, and we see these consistent racial disparities. And we have to assume that these individuals' engagement with society or their method for building wealth is has some sort of bias that causes these negative upwards and downward trends.
And
Because
I
if
don't I don't
yes,
disagree with you, but a correlation is not causation. And so
so which is why
my
we run multivariate regressions to figure out is there a causal relationship. This is a
I think sometimes it can be other factors that come into play. And I went through this recently because we did a book on a serial killing spree in Washington D.C. and I talked with a number of law enforcement officers from the 1970s who worked the
Mhm.
cases there, and I said, I being a pasty faced white guy, I don't know anything about these neighborhoods that is tangible. So explain it to me. And they said, you got to remember, we're looking at 50% dropout rate in these communities from high school. Okay. So I look at that and go, so what is the cause of that? And they're like, It's multiple causes. It's in some cases, this is the third or fourth generation of students who, their parents didn't graduate, their grandparents didn't graduate. And so bailing on school is a value that's not promoted from within that community.
Mhm.
Now, you might look at it and go, well, it's because the schools are racist and they're not given the same books and the better equipment and things along those lines. But as people who actually lived in that community, who were Black, who were I was interviewing, was going, a lot of this falls on us in our own community. We're not forcing that, or we're not driving that up. That could have a direct impact, for example, on somebody's capability to earn money. If you can't read, if you can't do basic math, etc., that can have a huge impact on it. Now, to say that that's racist because it's mostly impacting a particular community, the implication is someone's inflicting that racism.
right.
And I don't subscribe to that necessarily. And I'm using that as a very vague example, but we've been throwing some out.
All right. So, no. What you're saying is definitely true. It's multivariable, and oftentimes race is not even the biggest factor that determines a person's outcome. It's
That was my
rarely
question.
so, but it is a significant outcome. It's not the
Yeah.
greatest, but it is a significant one that we have to take into. For example, I think you would appreciate this. So, I'm pretty sure you've heard of the male-female gender pay gap, gender wage gap, right?
Yeah.
You've heard of this, right?
Hmm.
Women earn 79 cents for every dollar, 77 cents for every dollar that a man makes. Those when you that's a
Well,
very
hold on. You're getting to the point about how it's been debunked a million times over the last decade or so,
no.
right?
So it'll be a bit more complicated than that.
Okay.
So now you have to look at all the factors. So one, men tend to work longer hours than women.
Okay.
That's a fact. So if we account for that, okay,
That sounds like
hours worked. All right. So the disparities are, I think, like, I don't remember the numbers. I remember reading the study a while ago. It's like about 83 cents per $1. Then if you account for like industries or location, it starts closing down. And if you account for all relevant factors, it's around 96 cents for every dollar made. So there's still a 4 cent disparity. But there's actually something even more phenomenal about this, which is that disparity closes, and women end up earning more than men if they are unmarried in under the age of 30 and they don't have children. The moment a woman gets married, she suffers a negative wage cost. So married women are often discriminated against in the workplace and earn less, whereas husbands face like a wage premium for getting married. So they're more likely to get promotions and more likely to see increases in raises. And this has been documented by econometrics.
Well,
As
Econometrics
that
someone
makes
who
is
worked
that
out
makes
in the real
that makes
world,
perfect
I
sense.
found that hilarious. But okay.
yeah. So if we start accounting for that, like actual sexism, which is like discriminating against mothers, discriminating against married women, that would represent a very small
Well, hold on.
answer to the wage gap, but would still be a significant explanation for millions of dollars collectively earned.
So
Let's
are
go
you?
to the word that you use, which is discrimination against women, or that phrasing, because they went off and started a family, etc. So
Just getting
what you're
married.
well, no, but I'm or whatever. What you're seeing is they should get the same pay even if they've left the workforce for, let's say, 4 or 5 years, just to raise the kids enough to where they could do it. They should be receiving the same pay as someone who remained in the workforce, was active and productive in the company, and advanced themselves and the company's bottom line. They should be treated, they should get a boost up for that. And I would say that is sexism, because what you're doing is you're rewarding somebody, you know, for something they actually didn't do.
No, that was never my claim. My claim was there is a wage premium and a marriage premium.
Right, but the part that you missed is that he didn't say you were wrong. He said the way that you are phrasing it is and I mean,
So
I do
the
think
way
you're
that I
wrong.
phrase it is that
But the point
your marital status
the
is
point
irrelevant to your wages.
it's not irrelevant to your wages. A man who's married has a bigger incentive to work harder, and a woman who's married is more likely to take that time off.
Lutch, so
That has nothing to do with the liking women or not liking women or preferring. It has to do with business and wanting reliable employees.
Lutch, listen. Okay, then explain this to me. For two people, both married, one is a woman, one is a man. They both work equal number of hours. They both are equally productive. They both provide the same amount of value. Do you believe that the man, because he's married, should be paid more than the woman because she's married?
No,
No, all
Yeah,
things being equal, no.
exactly. So that's what the
All
analysis
things
found.
being equal, no.
but that right.
That no, the
All
But I
things
analysis.
can
aren't
tell
equal.
you,
No.
having worked for 25 years at Ernst and Young, there were analysis after analysis done every 2 years within the firm to look at, are we doing any pay gap differences at all across the board? Anytime anyone was even remotely spotted where it was caught and somebody said, wait a minute, let's look at comparable degrees, comparable years here at the firm, comparable years of experience, comparable education. When they spotted those things, they were instantly addressed. That is happening across the nation right now. And it happens in many companies, and it's very invisible. It's not a public relations gimmick. They don't announce
Surprisingly.
it. They don't make a big deal about it, but it happens every day in these companies. And it's small business and large businesses are doing this. So
Some
I
businesses
I
might be
strongly
fixing it.
believe that this gap that exists is one of someone playing with the statistics on it more and parsing the data differently. It's kind of like when somebody told me, we had this huge discussion. I worked in STEM. I was a technologist. And
Mhm.
somebody said, we've got to get more women in STEM. And I said, at what point are we not hiring women in STEM? If we get them, we hire them. We don't care if they're male, female. We don't care about any of that. We're looking for certain skill sets. And if people have them, we hire them. And the argument is, well, we've got to get more women into STEM because they can make more money. Well, that's their choice to go into the
Right.
STEM field. There's no block that prevents women from going into the STEM field. I said, what's the inherent block? The businesses will hire them the minute they get the skills we're looking for. We'll hire them
And
and we'll
especially
pay
if they
them
only have to,
exactly what we're paying the men.
or apparently if they're going to be paying them less, then why wouldn't every company be? I mean, I know this is a tired argument, but I haven't heard a good retort. Why is every company not completely staffed by females
Well,
and
I will
cut that
say when I
8%, that 8 cents or whatever on the dollar for every single employee every day, every year?
Wait,
yeah,
so
I mean, I will say
that's
when I
actually the
went to
reason why there's
India,
a
I
preference
did
to
see
hire
that
women.
kind of split.
Sorry, you're talking over
I'm
Okay.
everyone.
sorry, go ahead.
No, so this is actually a trend in tech companies where there is a preference to hire women.
Okay.
Uh, so not necessarily because they accept less pay, is because on average they tend to be more productive than men. Uh, Granted, so long as they are under the age of 30,
So
not
why don't we
married, and
need more
single.
men in tech then than
Well,
we have right now?
well, we need more men in college in general, so I guess that would field
I
to
mean,
more
that's
men
a
in
whole
tech.
other. That's a whole other. That's a
No,
Yeah,
whole other
so
conversation.
yeah.
so
You know,
again,
I used to be in your camp. I really was, but you
So
know,
was I.
no, so
I've pivoted heavily on college, and not everybody is destined to go down that path to be a success in life.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
I
confused by what you mean by that. As in, you don't believe that everyone is destined to be successful in college, or just successful in general?
I'm not saying that everyone is destined to go to that. It's a good thing for everyone to go, more people to go to college. I think that there are trades that they can be very productive in. I think this shoehorning of people into colleges is not healthy or productive.
and
And
now with the cost now everybody who's going to college for their bullshit degrees and then not able to get a job, and now everybody who didn't even get the experience of going to college or has already paid for their own college now is being asked to foot the bill. And so the push for college is definitely a multifaceted conversation. And education, of course, is a great thing, but at what cost? um
well, we should, if we could, it might be good to wrap up at this point. I've got some other stuff
yeah
I have to
All
hit.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point to wrap up. We definitely I would love to do this at least like once a month or so. We had a couple others who were supposed to join us and they weren't able to do so. But Anna, Rude, and Blaine, I want to thank you for this. This has been a really cool conversation,
Thank
and
you. Now I've got to go read a Brookings Institute.
Oh, thank you for having us on. And if you ever
Thank you.
need help, I'll send you more articles to read.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
And Blaine, before you go, anything you want to plug?
No, my stuff, people can Google me or go out on Amazon and look at my books, and there's nothing specific I'm pushing right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Anna Rune, anything you'd like to plug?
I guess not necessarily just for me, but my coach Ed McCon Moraes is competing for a Jiu-Jitsu World Championship. Please follow him and watch him defend his belt.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I started jujitsu right before the lockdown, and then I moved and haven't been able to get back.
I
into
I
just
it.
started this week.
Oh, really? Cool.
Oh wow! I just recovered from fractured fingers, so I'm finally going back in.
I've
Nice.
just been learning basic boxing moves at this point, but my instructor is a black belt and he's moving me into it. So I'm incredibly sore everywhere right now.
As you should be.
Yes.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you again so much. I think this was a great start to something. What it's going to turn into, hopefully, we'll see it blossom. But for now, this I'm more than happy with what we did here, and thank you guys again.
Thank you.
Right.
Take care.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
All right. So that was an interesting conversation. With Anna Rude being more on the left and Blaine being more on the right, and me being more in the center, maybe kind of not even leaning towards the right, just leaning away from the left. Let's put it that way. I wasn't sure where, I had conversations individually with them. I did IDRYB 06 is one of them, and I don't know. Both of them have episodes of the podcast, so we were able to talk about those things. If you haven't seen it, Anna Root and I went on for 4 hours in his podcast, or no, 2 hours or 3 hours in his podcast, and then in the last IDRYB live, we went for 4 hours. I think maybe even a little longer. So there is a lot here. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to talk about. There is, things to parse out, and I think the the point about semantics and things being words being used differently, I think that's a really good point. I think that's a really prevalent issue when it comes to having these kinds of discussions, when you're doing it in good faith like this, and especially if you're in some Twitter beef or something, and you don't expect good faith. Certainly it's difficult, and so I think taking the time to say, okay, when you say systemic racism, what is it that you mean by systemic racism? Okay, when you say war, when you say that, and if we can parse these things out, then a lot of the talking past each other that happens in any kind of conversation like this, if we can tamper that down, I'm not looking to convince anyone of anything. It would be nice if I could convince somebody that what I think is right and is great. But like I anticipated, this was not clearly defined on partisan lines. There, understandably, when it comes to the issues themselves, we seem Blaine and I seem to agree a little bit more, and Anna Rude seems to think about things a little bit differently. There was supposed to be another left leaning participant who wasn't able to make it. Shout out to Jared. Go check out his episode of IDRYB that just dropped last week, and a clip just dropped this morning. I'm sure you realized there was no podcast episode this week, and so we are running with Jared. He could not be here tonight. And Ryan Bedell, who is he's on the left, but he is also an atheist. And so with that crew, I thought we would be able to have quite an interesting conversation, and we were able to have one even without them. So I can't wait to see what we get when they do actually join. So let me know what you thought about this. This is supposed to be a starting point. This is supposed to be the first of many. I think this is going to be, again, something that we want to do at least once a month, maybe a little bit more often. Maybe not all of us every time, but an ongoing conversation. I think it's something that people don't do enough. They have conversations with a lot of people, but the ongoing conversation is where you have the ability to dig into the specific thoughts and take the time. And maybe we have a whole IDRYB live just about what do we mean by systemic racism, or what do we mean by discrimination. And definitely let me know in the comments below what you think we could talk about after seeing who we are and where we come from and how we interact. What kind of things should we be discussing? Which kinds of things should we be discussing? yeah, I'm like I said, this is going to be a regular thing, so make sure you subscribe so that you know when we're going live. You can join the chat. We didn't have any chatters today, but that is going to change as we keep doing this, and as you know that this is going to be here, so will somebody else, and they will be here too. You guys can have your own discussion. You guys can come up on the panel if all of that stuff. Like I've been telling you, I'm expanding this channel. We're doing more and more and more, and this is just a piece of it. So again, the thank you to Blaine and Anirudh. They are linked in the description below, along with their episodes, where you can see our conversations about that. Don't also forget about those support links. I would love a little bit of help getting this going. And if you don't want to do any of that, just make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram. IDRYB Lutch right there. And just sit at home and think about how awesome I am. That would be great. But monetary support would be cool too. Yeah. But thanks again. And I am out.